So if I was starting my property journey all over again, if I had 50k to get started in property and I was going back 16 years of property investing experience, starting from scratch, what would I do? What would I do first? Now, if you're thinking, I'm new to property, I want to get into property for the first time, but there's a whole bunch of different things I can do, there's loads of different strategies, where do I start? Then this might be for you. So what I would do personally is I would take that pot of capital, that 50k, and I would try to turn it into a larger pot of capital as soon as possible. So I'd be leveraging as much as possible from other individuals who are looking for a return on their investment. So I'd be looking to obtain private finance to turn that 50k into a much larger pot as soon as possible. But strictly speaking, if I just had that 50k, what would I do with it? What would be the first project I would invest in with that money? Would it be buy-to-lets? Would it be flips? Would it be HMOs, service accommodation, commercial property, new build, rent-to-rent? There's a whole bunch of stuff you can do in property. So sometimes it's confusing because you don't know where to start. So what would I do? I would do a flip. The first project I would do would be a flip. Why? Because the flip gives you, a well-executed flip anyway, gives you a massive amount of profit in a very short space of time. Typically on the flips I do, I'm looking for a 20% return on investment or higher. So for every 100k invested, I'm looking to get 20k back as a minimum. So that can quickly build and generate this big pot of capital when you flip, because you're realizing that short-term gain. So flipping, especially when cash is tight in the beginning, is a great strategy to build up that pot. So that's what I would do. I would flip. And only once I've generated a bigger pot of capital, so the capital's grown, would I then start investing in, as well as flips. So I'd do more flips with a pot as it grows, of course, but I would also invest some of that profit back into boring, non-glamorous, unsexy buy-to-lets. Straightforward family buy-to-lets, single lets. So I'd be investing for the long term. So I'd be combining this pot of capital that I'm growing with the long-term capital appreciation, the capital gains that you can get from buy-to-lets without really doing anything, because you're just holding the property for the long term. We know property prices can go down over the short term, but over the long term, they always go up. So I would be holding for the long term, balancing it out with my flips. And of course, with buy-to-lets, they give you that steady, regular cash flow, that profit that's coming in whilst you're out looking for the next deal. So building up that consistent revenue coming in every month from the rent that you receive, that profit that's coming in. It's not a huge amount per property, but it builds up when you start adding a few to your portfolio. So that's what I would do. I would flip and then invest in boring buy-to-lets as well as I'm generating that pot of capital and it's growing. The great thing about flips as a strategy is they're very easy to finance, because the thing about flips is you do a deal, so you buy a property, refurbish it, sell it over the short term. So if you are borrowing money, it's short-term debt, because when you sell the property, all that debt is cleared. So you're not getting any long-term finance. And what's great about that is it's really attractive to investors. So if people have money sat there in the bank doing very little, then you can offer them a generous rate of return to fund your flips, which is great for you. And the generous return, of course, is great for them. So it's win-win for investor and for property developer at the same time. So the investor might not have the time, the inclination, the knowledge, or the interest to actually go and do a deal. But if you do, and you're looking for finance, that can be a great combination to leverage other people's money. So you can quickly turn a pot of 50k into a lot more by simply leveraging other people's money. So using private finance. So making sure that you've got terms agreed, set out, so you know where you stand, so the investor and yourself knows where you stand. That's really important. So flips are one of the best ways to do that. In summary, build the pot of capital even greater from flipping, and then reinvest for long term. So I would continue, so through buy-to-lets, investing for the long term, through that passive regular income that you get on the rent and the capital gains. So you're balancing those two out. That's what I would do if I was starting all over again in property. Now, of course, all these other strategies you hear about, they work. There's examples of people making these strategies work. So I'm not saying don't do the other strategies I mentioned. If you want to do them, that's absolutely fine. If you want to go into a different area of property, that's great. But what I know from my experience is generating big amounts of profit through flips is a great way to build capital. And then those regular, boring, monthly income cash flow chunks you get from your boring buy-to-lets can really build up over time. Tenants don't move very often if you're investing in the right areas, so it's pretty low maintenance, it's pretty easy to manage them. And if you're using a letting agent or if you're doing it yourself, fairly straightforward. You don't have loads of maintenance to worry about because you've just essentially got one tenant in there. Now, of course, some people have horror stories where tenants have trashed the property and it's an absolute nightmare. That's the risk you take when you do invest in buy-to-lets or as any property investment strategy, but it's unlikely. The reality is if you get a good tenant in there, they'll look after it, you're getting paid every month, and that property's going up in value over the long term. So combining those two strategies is what I would do with that initial capital pot. Hopefully in some way you found this video useful. If so, go ahead, like the channel, subscribe, and you will see me, as always, very soon in the next video.